Brantley Blackwood, a titan of New York real estate, walked into his preliminary divorce hearing like a king entering his throne room. On his arm wasn't his lawyer, but his mistress, a stunningly beautiful and much younger woman named Cassandra Reed. It was a calculated act of cruelty, a power play designed to humiliate the wife he was casting aside after 20 years of marriage. He smirked at Galatia, expecting to see her crumble under the weight of his public betrayal. But he didn't truly see the woman across the aisle. He only saw a quiet, inconvenient obstacle to his new life. And he had no idea that the unassuming man sitting beside her, the one with the steel-gray hair and impassive expression, wasn't just any lawyer. He was Donovan Shaw, a legend in these halls, a man who had dismantled empires with nothing but a fountain pen and the unvarnished truth. The air in the back of the Rolls-Royce Cullinan was cool and smelled of Italian leather, and Cassandra's cloying perfume a custom blend from Le Labo that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Brantley Blackwood adjusted the cuff of his Brioni suit, the fabric a whisper-soft vicuña, and glanced at the woman beside him. Cassandra Reed was in his estimation perfection. Her blonde hair was a cascade of professionally managed waves. Her lips were full, her body sculpted by a personal trainer he paid for, and her eyes held a captivating mix of ambition and adoration. She was a living, breathing testament to his success. "Are you sure about this, Johnny?" she asked, her voice a practiced, breathy purr. She ran a perfectly manicured finger tipped with a 4-carat canary diamond he'd bought her last month along the lapel of his jacket. "Bringing me to court." Brantley chuckled, a deep rumbling sound of pure self-satisfaction. "It's not a trial, kitten. It's a preliminary hearing, a formality. It's to show Galatia that the world has moved on, that I have moved on." He looked out at the blur of Manhattan's Upper East Side. "She needs to see the new reality." "You are my reality now," Cassandra preened. This was exactly what she wanted to hear. At 26, she was a moderately successful social media influencer, her brand built on a carefully curated fantasy of luxury travel, high fashion, and effortless beauty. Brantley Blackwood wasn't just her lover. He was her ultimate content. Her ticket from the B-list to the stratosphere. His divorce was her coronation. "She'll be devastated," Cassandra said, feigning concern, while her mind calculated the potential for a viral story later. "Surviving the drama with grace." It had a nice ring to it. "She'll be realistic," Brantley corrected. "My lawyer Gregory Adler is the best corporate man in the city. He says this is an open and shut case. The prenup is ironclad. She gets the house in Connecticut, the agreed-upon alimony for 5 years, and a nice little trust fund. She'll be comfortable. More than comfortable. But the Empire Blackwood Estates is mine. It always has been." He believed it with every fiber of his being. He had built Blackwood Estates from a single scrappy development in Queens to a multi-billion-dollar portfolio of gleaming skyscrapers and luxury condominiums that reshaped the city's skyline. Galatia in his mind had been a passenger, a supportive, elegant, and ultimately replaceable part of his ascent. She'd raised their son, hosted his dinner parties, and decorated their homes. Important roles he'd concede, but not foundational. The foundation was his genius, his risk, his relentless drive. His phone buzzed. It was Adler. Brantley just checking in. "We're all set for 10 a.m. I'll meet you on the courthouse steps. Remember the game plan. We're calm. We're reasonable. We're the picture of magnanimity." "Don't worry," Greg Brantley said, a smirk in his voice. "I'm bringing a visual aid to demonstrate just how moved on I am." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Brantley, you're not talking about Ms. Reed, are you? I strongly advised against that. It's unnecessarily inflammatory. It gives her side ammunition. It's a power play, Greg. It shows I'm not afraid. It shows this is over. Galatia's lawyer is some no-name from a boutique firm. What's he going to do? Be offended. This whole thing will be wrapped up by lunch." He could almost hear Adler sigh through the phone. "As you wish, Brantley. I'll see you there." Brantley hung up, annoyed by the lawyer's caution. Adler was a shark in the boardroom, but he didn't understand the art of personal warfare. This wasn't a negotiation over zoning permits. It was a conquest. Galatia had dared to contest the prenup, claiming material contributions to the business in its early years. A laughable assertion. He'd handled the finances, the deals, the vision. She'd chosen paint swatches and picked caterers. As the Cullinan purred to a stop in front of the New York County Courthouse at Foley Square, Brantley felt a surge of adrenaline. The press was already there. A few photographers, alerted by a tip he'd had his publicist discreetly plant, started snapping pictures as the chauffeur opened his door. He stepped out a titan in his prime and then turned to help Cassandra. She emerged like a movie star, her white Alexander McQueen dress, a stark angelic contrast to the grimy city steps. She slipped her hand into his, and they ascended the steps together, a tableau of new power and old money. He scanned the crowd for his wife. He didn't see her. Probably hiding, he thought. Probably afraid to face me. To face us. He felt a cold flicker of triumph. This was going to be even easier than he thought. While Brantley Blackwood was performing for the cameras, Galatia Blackwood was sitting in a quiet, book-lined office 30 blocks away, a cup of lukewarm tea held tightly in her hands. The office wasn't the sterile glass and chrome box favored by modern law firms. It was paneled in dark mahogany, the shelves overflowing with leather-bound legal texts and first-edition novels. It smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and quiet confidence. It was the office of Donovan Shaw. Galatia had found his name not through a glossy magazine's top lawyers list, but through a quiet recommendation from her father's old estate planner, a man who had been practicing law since the Nixon administration. "You don't want a bulldog," he told her. "Brantley will have a team of those. You need a ghost. Someone who dismantles the engine while the other side is still polishing the hood ornament. You need Shaw." Donovan Shaw was the antithesis of Brantley. Where Brantley was loud, Shaw was quiet. Where Brantley wore his wealth like a suit of armor, Shaw wore a simple, perfectly tailored but unassuming gray suit that seemed to have been his uniform for decades. He was in his late 60s with a full head of silver hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He didn't interrupt, he didn't offer false platitudes. He listened. For 2 hours during their first meeting, Galatia had talked. She spoke of the early years when Blackwood Estates was just a name on a piece of letterhead in their cramped 2-bedroom apartment. She described how she'd used her art history degree to identify up-and-coming neighborhoods, seeing the cultural potential that preceded gentrification. She detailed how she'd leveraged her social connections cultivated over years of charity work to introduce Brantley to the old money investors who wouldn't have given a brash developer from Queens the time of day. She recounted late nights spent poring over architectural plans, offering aesthetic suggestions that turned cookie-cutter condos into coveted properties. She wasn't just choosing paint swatches, she was shaping the brand's very identity. Brantley had been the engine, yes, but she had been the navigator and the designer, the one who gave his raw ambition a veneer of class and desirability. He had long since forgotten that. When she finished, Donovan Shaw had simply nodded. "He has forgotten that your contributions were not recorded on a balance sheet," he said, his voice calm and even. "Men like Mr. Blackwood often mistake the tangible for the valuable. Our job is to educate him, and the court." Now, on the morning of the hearing, he was reviewing a slim, leather-bound folder. "Gregory Adler is a fine corporate attorney," Shaw said, not looking up. "He is an expert at mergers, acquisitions, and hostile takeovers. He views this divorce as a corporate dissolution. He will focus on the prenuptial agreement as if it were a shareholder's contract." "And it isn't?" Galatia asked, her voice trembling slightly. Shaw finally looked up, his gaze direct but not unkind. "A marriage is a partnership, Mrs. Blackwood, not a corporation. The law in its finer moments recognizes that. Mr. Adler will argue the letter of the agreement. I will argue the spirit of the partnership and the facts of its dissolution." He slid a single sheet of paper across the polished desk. It was a list of financial transactions. I engaged the services of a forensic accounting firm, Kroll Associates. They are the best. They have been tracing the flow of capital from Blackwood Estates for the past 18 months since your husband first met Ms. Reed. Galatia stared at the numbers. They were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled into a shell corporation named CR Creative Consulting. A lease on a penthouse at 733 Park Avenue paid for by the company. The purchase of a brand new Porsche Taycan registered as a company vehicle. A corporate American Express Centurion card, the mythical black card, with a monthly spend that eclipsed the annual salary of a city schoolteacher, all charged to a single user, Cassandra Reed. He told me the business was having a tight year. She whispered the betrayal a fresh, sharp pain. He said we had to cut back on our charitable donations. Discrepancies of this nature are what we lawyers refer to as dissipation of marital assets, Shaw said calmly. Or in layman's terms, he's been spending your money on his girlfriend. He closed the folder. This is the first step. Today, Mr. Adler will speak of contracts. We will speak of conduct. To fund this fight, Galatia had made a sacrifice. The week before, she had arranged a private sale through Christie's. The piece was a small, exquisite charcoal sketch by Edgar Degas d'Anceus Basculon, which she had inherited from her grandmother. It had hung in her private study for 20 years, a source of quiet joy. The proceeds from its sale were now funding Donovan Shaw and his team of accountants. She was converting her past into her future. I saw on the news that he might bring her, Galatia said, the thought still a source of dread. Donovan Shaw stood and walked to the window, looking down at the bustling street. Let him, he said. Arrogance provides its own rope. All I have to do is let him use it. Are you ready? Mrs. Blackwood Galatia took a deep breath. The woman who had been terrified a month ago was gone, replaced by someone leaner, harder, more resolved. She thought of the Degas sketch of her grandmother's legacy of the 2 decades she had invested in a man who now saw her as a line item to be settled. Yes, Mr. Shaw, she said, her voice clear and strong. I am. The atmosphere inside the New York County courthouse was a chaotic symphony of controlled panic. Lawyers with worried expressions hurried down marble corridors, clients huddled in anxious whispers, and the air hummed with the weight of 1,000 private dramas being played out in public. For Brantley Blackwood, it was just another stage. He and Cassandra made their entrance into the hallway outside courtroom 4B with theatrical precision. His arm was possessively around her waist, his head held high, nodding curtly at the few people he recognized. He was a shark in his natural habitat, a world of power, intimidation, and high stakes. Cassandra, for her part, played the role of the devoted ingenue flawlessly, her expression a careful blend of supportive concern and unshakable confidence in her man. They were a spectacle, and they knew it. The whispers followed them like a wake. Gregory Adler met them near the courtroom doors, his face a mask of professional neutrality that barely concealed his deep disapproval. Brantley, he said in a low, tight voice. Ms. Reed. Greg, ready for the fireworks! Brantley boomed loud enough for those nearby to hear. I'd prefer a quiet, orderly proceeding, Adler muttered, shuffling his papers. The judge is Annalise Keller. She's a stickler for decorum, no nonsense, by the book. Don't worry, Brantley said, clapping him on the shoulder. We'll be on our best behavior. Just then, the doors at the far end of the hall opened and Galatia Blackwood walked through. She was alone. There was no entourage, no nervous family members, no tearful best friend. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored navy Chanel suit, a piece of understated elegance that screamed old money and quiet dignity. Her hair was pulled back in a neat chignon and her face was composed, her eyes focused straight ahead. She wasn't just surviving the gauntlet of stares and whispers. She was ignoring it completely as if it were all beneath her notice. She walked directly toward them, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. Brantley's smirk widened. This was it. The confrontation. He prepared a condescending pleasantry, something to twist the knife. But Galatia's eyes never met his. Her gaze was fixed on a point just over his shoulder. She passed them without a word, without a flicker of acknowledgement, as if they were nothing more than statues in a hallway. It was a cut so deep and so clean, it left Brantley momentarily speechless. He had come here to humiliate her, and in a single silent gesture, she had rendered him and his beautiful mistress completely invisible. Following a few paces behind her was Donovan Shaw. He was carrying a worn leather briefcase that looked as old as he was. He saw Adler and offered a brief, polite nod. "Gregory," Shaw said, his voice even. "Donovan." Adler replied, his tone suddenly more formal, more respectful. "I wasn't aware you were handling this." "Mrs. Blackwood retained my services last month," Shaw said simply. A flicker of unease crossed Adler's face. He knew of Donovan Shaw. Everyone did. Shaw wasn't a flashy litigator who ended up on magazine covers. He was a lawyer's lawyer, a strategist who operated in the quiet, lethal depths of case law and financial discovery. He was the man you called when you didn't just want to win, you wanted to systematically dismantle your opponent's entire position until they had nowhere left to stand. Brantley, recovering from Galatia's public dismissal, hadn't noticed the shift in his lawyer's demeanor. "Is this the guy?" he whispered to Adler loud enough for Shaw to hear. "He looks like he should be retiring to Florida." Donovan Shaw's expression didn't change. He simply met Brantley's gaze for a brief second, and in that second, there was no anger, no intimidation, just a cold, clear assessment. It was the look a geologist gives a rock before taking a hammer to it. "All rise." The bailiff's voice echoed as the courtroom doors opened. They filed in. Brantley, ever the showman, guided Cassandra to a seat in the front row of the public gallery directly in Galatia's line of sight. He gave her hand a squeeze and a confident wink before taking his place at the plaintiff's table with Adler. Galatia and Shaw sat at the defendant's table. She stared straight ahead at the judge's bench, her posture perfect, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Judge Annalise Keller entered, a formidable woman in her late 50s, with sharp features and an air of permanent impatience. She sat and surveyed the room over her glasses. Her eyes briefly registered Cassandra in the front row, and a tiny, almost imperceptible frown creased her brow before vanishing. "We are here for the matter of Blackwood versus Blackwood, docket number 743B25. She began, her voice crisp. "This is a preliminary hearing to address motions regarding the prenuptial agreement and temporary financial arrangements. Mr. Adler, you may begin." Adler stood smooth and confident once more. He launched into his prepared remarks, detailing the clear and unambiguous language of the prenuptial agreement. He painted Brantley as a generous man seeking a swift and amicable resolution, being unfairly held up by unreasonable demands. It was a solid standard and utterly predictable opening. Brantley leaned back in his chair, feeling the familiar thrill of control. Everything was going according to his script. He glanced over at Galatia. She remained impassive. He then looked at Cassandra, who gave him a small, encouraging smile. His kingdom was secure. His future was bright. Then Judge Keller said, "Thank you, Mr. Adler. Mr. Shaw, your response." Donovan Shaw rose to his feet. He didn't move to the lectern. He simply stood beside his table, his hands clasped behind his back. The air in the room seemed to shift, growing still and heavy with anticipation. "Your Honor," he began, his voice not loud but carrying to every corner of the room, "we are not here today to contest the existence of the prenuptial agreement." Adler and Brantley exchanged a look of surprise. This was unexpected. "We are here," Shaw continued, "to discuss the conduct of the plaintiff, Mr. Blackwood, which has not only violated the spirit of that agreement, but has also, we will argue, constituted a deliberate and systematic effort to defraud Mrs. Blackwood of her rightful share of the marital estate." A murmur went through the courtroom. Brantley sat bolt upright, his face darkening. Fraud. The word was an insult, an absurdity. "Objection, Your Honor," Adler snapped, jumping to his feet. Counsel is making wild, unsubstantiated accusations. This is character assassination, not legal argument. Judge Keller looked at Shaw. Mr. Shaw, you are making a very serious claim. You had better be able to back it up. Donovan Shaw gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I can, Your Honor, he said, opening the old leather briefcase. And I intend to. The quiet confidence in Donovan Shaw's voice silenced the courtroom more effectively than a judge's gavel. Gregory Adler remained standing flustered while Brantley Blackwood stared his face a thunderous mask of indignation. He had expected a legal skirmish, a debate over percentages and timelines. He had not expected a declaration of war. Mr. Shaw, Judge Keller said, her voice dangerously level. Proceed. But be warned, I have very little tolerance for theatrics in my courtroom. There will be no theatrics, Your Honor, Shaw replied, his tone deferential but firm. Only facts. He pulled a single precisely bound document from his briefcase. Before we address the prenuptial agreement, I would like to file a motion to introduce evidence related to the significant and demonstrable dissipation of marital assets by the plaintiff beginning approximately 18 months ago. Adler was on his feet again. Objection. The timeline is irrelevant. The prenuptial agreement clearly defines separate and marital property. My client's personal spending from his own accounts is his business. Is it, Mr. Adler? Shaw countered, his voice smooth as silk. Is Blackwood Estates a privately held corporation in which Mr. Blackwood is the sole shareholder considered his own account? Or is it the primary marital asset, the value of which my client has a direct invested interest in? Judge Keller leaned forward, her eyes narrowed. The source of the funds is Blackwood Estates, Mr. Shaw. Exclusively, Your Honor. Objection overruled, the judge stated flatly, waving Adler back into his seat. The court will hear the motion. Present your evidence, Mr. Shaw. Brantley felt a prickle of sweat on his brow. This was not the plan. Adler was supposed to be in control, quoting clauses from the prenup until Galatia's lawyer was buried in paperwork. Instead, this old man was changing the entire game, and the judge was letting him. Shaw didn't begin with a fiery accusation. His approach was far more devastating. It was methodical, clinical, like a surgeon making the first incision. He placed a document on the court's projector so the judge and the opposing counsel could see. Your Honor, this is a copy of a lease agreement for the property at 733 Park Avenue, Penthouse B, Shaw began. The lease was signed 16 months ago. The lessee is Blackwood Estates. The monthly rent is $42,000. Brantley's blood ran cold. It was Cassandra's apartment. Mr. Blackwood, Shaw said, turning to face him for the first time. As the CEO of Blackwood Estates, can you tell the court what business purpose this residential penthouse serves for your commercial real estate company? Brantley looked to Adler, who gave a slight shake of his head. He was trapped. To lie would be perjury. To tell the truth would be an admission. It's used for entertaining potential investors. Brantley stammered the lie, tasting like ash in his mouth. A corporate apartment. I see. Shaw said, his expression unchanging. He put up a second document. This is the building's access log for the past 16 months, obtained via subpoena. The log shows only one key card has been consistently used for entry. That key card is registered to a Ms. Cassandra Reed. Can you tell the court what role Ms. Reed, an influencer by trade, plays in entertaining your investors? The room was utterly silent. Brantley could feel every eye on him. He could feel Cassandra's panicked gaze from the gallery. He could feel Galatia's quiet, steady presence at the other table. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the judge. She sometimes assists with hosting duties, he mumbled. The words sounded feeble, even to his own ears. Hosting duties that require her to be the sole long-term resident of a penthouse leased by the company. Shaw pressed his voice, still maddeningly calm. Objection! This is a fishing expedition, Adler cried out, his voice strained. It seems to me, Mr. Adler, that Mr. Shaw has already caught a fish, Judge Keller remarked dryly. Continue, Mr. Shaw. Shaw placed a third document on the projector. It was a vehicle registration form from the New York DMV. This is the title for a 2025 Porsche Taycan Turbo S. Purchase price $212,000. The vehicle was purchased by Blackwood Estates 3 months ago. It is registered as a company car for executive use. Yet according to GPS data from the vehicle's onboard system, also obtained via subpoena, the car's primary location, when not in use, is the private parking garage at 733 Park Avenue. And its daily commute, it seems, is between that address, the Equinox Gym on 74th Street, and various high-end boutiques on Madison Avenue. Shaw paused, letting the information sink in. Mr. Blackwood, as a matter of corporate governance, how does this use of a company asset contribute to the shareholder value of Blackwood Estates? Brantley's face was now a deep mottled red. The king was being questioned in his own throne room, and his crown was starting to feel very heavy. This wasn't a legal argument. It was a public vivisection. Shaw wasn't just attacking his finances. He was stripping away his dignity piece by meticulous piece. He shot a venomous glare at Galatia. She met his eyes for the first time that day. There was no triumph in her expression, no smug satisfaction. There was only a profound, weary sadness. It was the look of a woman who was not enjoying his destruction, but had simply accepted it as necessary. That look, more than anything Shaw had said, unnerved him to his very core. He had assumed she was fighting for money. He was just now beginning to understand that she was fighting for her life, for the value of the 20 years he had tried to erase. Shaw picked up another file. "And now, Your Honor," he said, "let's turn to the matter of a consulting firm named CR Creative Consulting LLC. Brantley felt a genuine bolt of fear. He knew what was coming next, and he knew with a sudden gut-wrenching certainty that there was absolutely nothing he or his high-priced corporate lawyer could do to stop it. The trap had been set months ago. He had just walked into it. The name CR Creative Consulting LLC hung in the air like a toxic cloud. For Brantley, it was the sound of his own carefully constructed world beginning to fracture. It was a shell company, a ghost entity. He'd had Adler's junior associate set up for the sole purpose of funneling tax-deductible business expenses to Cassandra without raising red flags on his personal accounts. It was supposed to be clever. It was supposed to be invisible. Donovan Shaw, however, was treating it like the star witness for the prosecution. CR Creative Consulting. Shaw repeated, his voice echoing slightly in the tense silence. Registered in Delaware, of course. A very popular state for such creative enterprises. Your Honor, before you are the articles of incorporation for this LLC. The sole registered agent and beneficiary is listed as Cassandra Reed. He turned his cool, analytical gaze back to Brantley. Mr. Blackwood Estates has been paying this consulting firm a monthly retainer of $50,000 for the past 14 months. That comes to a total of $700,000. Could you please enlighten the court as to the specific consulting services Ms. Reed has provided to your multi-billion-dollar real estate firm that would justify such a fee? Brantley's mind raced. He had coached Cassandra on this. It's for social media strategy, Johnny. Branding. Reaching a younger demographic. It had sounded plausible over champagne at Daniel. In the cold, harsh light of a federal courtroom, it sounded pathetic. Ms. Reed is a brand expert, Brantley said, forcing a confident tone he did not feel. She consults on marketing strategies for our newer luxury properties. Her expertise in the digital space is invaluable. Is it? Shaw asked, a hint of steel entering his voice. He gestured to a clerk who handed him a thick binder. This is a complete printout of Ms. Reed's entire social media output for the past 18 months. Her Instagram, her TikTok, her blog. We have analyzed every single post. He opened the binder. Over this period, Ms. Reed has mentioned Blackwood Estates or any of its properties exactly 0 times. She has, however, posted 73 pictures of herself on a yacht in St. Bart's, a trip paid for by the Blackwood Estates corporate card under the line item Caribbean Real Estate Scouting. She has posted 42 pictures from a wellness retreat in Aspen, also charged to the company. She has posted numerous unboxing videos of designer handbags, jewelry, and clothing, all purchased with funds that trace back to payments made to CR Creative Consulting. Shaw looked up from the binder, his eyes locking onto Brantley's. So I ask you again, Mr. Blackwood, what specific services, what reports, what marketing plans has Blackwood Estates received in exchange for the $700,000 it has paid Ms. Reed? We subpoenaed all records of communication, all work product from CR Creative Consulting. The return was a single one-page invoice each month with one line, consulting services. Nothing else. Gregory Adler was on his feet, his face pale. Your Honor, this is beyond the scope of a preliminary hearing. Mr. Shaw is trying to conduct a full-blown financial audit in open court. Mr. Adler, Judge Keller interjected, her voice sharp as broken glass. Your client is the CEO of a company that is the primary marital asset in this dispute. Mr. Shaw is presenting evidence that your client has been using that company as a personal slush fund to finance his extramarital affair. It is not only within the scope of this hearing, it is at the very heart of it. Sit down. Adler sat, his authority completely stripped away. He was a corporate lawyer who had walked into a bar fight and he was being pummeled. Brantley felt the walls closing in. The confidence, the arrogance that had been his armor for decades was cracking. He glanced into the gallery. Cassandra was no longer looking at him with adoration. She was staring at Donovan Shaw with wide-eyed terror. She was realizing, just as he was, that this wasn't just about his money anymore. This was about her money. The apartment, the car, the consulting fees, they were all being laid bare as the proceeds of a fraud. She was implicated. Shaw was relentless. He moved on, presenting evidence of a G-Wagon purchased for Cassandra's mother in Florida, a down payment on a beach house in the Hamptons for her brother, all funneled through the same corporate accounts. Each transaction was a hammer blow chipping away at the foundation of Brantley's empire. He was being portrayed not as a captain of industry, but as a common cheat, a man so blinded by a new lover that he would risk everything, bleeding his own company dry. The sum total of the funds diverted from Blackwood Estates to Ms. Reed and her family through direct payments, leases, vehicle purchases, and credit card expenditures, Shaw announced, his voice ringing with finality, comes to $4,872,000. He let the number hang in the air. Nearly $5 million in 18 months. Money, Shaw continued, turning to face the judge. That was part of the marital estate. Money that was earned during his 20-year marriage to my client. Money that rightfully belongs at least in half to Mrs. Galatia Blackwood. Brantley finally snapped. The humiliation was too much. The calculated destruction of his image was unbearable. This is ridiculous, he roared, slamming his hand on the table and rising to his feet. It's my company, my money, I built it, I can spend it on whatever or whoever I want. The outburst echoed in the stunned silence of the courtroom. It was a cry of pure entitled rage. It was also a complete and utter confession. Judge Keller stared at him, her face devoid of any emotion. Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. You will sit down. You will be silent, or I will have the bailiff assist you. Slowly, his chest heaving, Brantley sank back into his chair. The mask was gone. The king was dethroned. For the first time, he looked not powerful but small. He risked a glance at Galatia. She was looking down at her hands, but he saw her shoulders shake once, a single silent sob of either grief or release. He couldn't tell which, and for some reason that was the most terrifying thing of all. The fallout from Brantley's outburst settled over the courtroom like a shroud. He had not only confirmed Shaw's allegations, but had revealed the raw, arrogant entitlement that fueled his actions. Gregory Adler looked as if he'd been physically struck, his entire case strategy shattered by his own client's lack of control. It was in this moment of stunned silence that the true nature of Donovan Shaw's reputation became clear. He wasn't just a good lawyer, he was a master of the judicial environment. He understood not just the law but the temperament of the court, and specifically the temperament of Judge Annalise Keller. Adler, trying to regain some semblance of control, rose shakily. "Your Honor, in light of my client's emotional state, I request a brief recess to confer with him." "Denied, Mr. Adler," Judge Keller said without hesitation. She then looked directly at Donovan Shaw. "Mr. Shaw, you mentioned fraud. Dissipation of assets, however egregious, is one thing. Fraud is a criminal matter. The bar for that is exceedingly high." Here was the connection, the synergy that Brantley could never have anticipated. Judge Keller and Donovan Shaw were not friends. They did not socialize. But they were products of the same demanding old-school legal tradition. For years, Shaw had argued cases in her court, and before that in front of the senior judges who had been her mentors. She knew his work. She knew he did not use words like fraud lightly. He didn't bluff. When Donovan Shaw laid a card on the table, it was always an ace. "I am aware of the bar, Your Honor," Shaw said calmly, "and I am prepared to meet it." He produced his final set of documents. "This is not just about lavish spending. This is about a concerted effort to hide and shield assets in anticipation of this divorce proceeding in direct violation of state and federal law." He placed the first folder on the projector. It was a series of wire transfer confirmations from the corporate accounts of Blackwood Estates to an entity called Blackwood Holdings International, based in the Cayman Islands. "Over the last 6 months, Mr. Blackwood has transferred over $35 million of corporate funds to this offshore account," Shaw stated, "an account that was conveniently omitted from his preliminary financial disclosures to this court." Brantley felt the floor drop out from under him. The offshore account was his ace in the hole, his secret war chest set up by an exclusive Swiss firm that had promised him absolute discretion. How could Shaw possibly know? "The accountants at Kroll are remarkably thorough," Shaw said, as if reading his mind. "They can trace the digital ghost of a single dollar through any firewall in the world, but they had help." He produced a second document. "This is an affidavit signed and sworn from Mr. Albert Chen, former Chief Financial Officer of Blackwood Estates. Mr. Chen resigned 2 months ago. He states under penalty of perjury that Mr. Blackwood explicitly ordered him to make these transfers and to cook the books to disguise them as overseas investment capital." Adler shot to his feet. "Objection. We were not made aware of this witness." "He is not a witness. He is a whistleblower," Shaw corrected. "And his affidavit was delivered to my office last week." He felt his own professional and legal liability was at risk due to Mr. Blackwood's actions. The air went out of Brantley's lungs. Albert Chen. Quiet, meticulous, loyal Albert. He had offered him a 7-figure severance package to keep him quiet. He never imagined the man's conscience or his fear of prison would outweigh the money. Now for the final killing blow. Shaw held up a single piece of paper. "And finally, Your Honor, this is the financial disclosure form Mr. Blackwood signed and submitted to this court 3 weeks ago. It is a sworn statement made under penalty of perjury outlining his assets and liabilities." Shaw's voice dropped, becoming grave and heavy. "On page 4, section B, under offshore holdings and foreign accounts, he has written the word none." He let the paper fall onto the table. "That is not dissipation, Your Honor. That is not poor judgment. That is a deliberate, calculated lie to this court. That is perjury. That is fraud." The silence that followed was absolute. The word perjury echoed off the marble walls. It transformed the case from a messy divorce into a potential criminal proceeding. Brantley looked at his lawyer, his face pleading, but Adler was staring at the documents, his expression one of pure horror. He was a corporate attorney skilled in navigating hostile takeovers, not felony charges. He was utterly, hopelessly out of his depth. Then Brantley looked at Cassandra. The transformation in her was complete. The fear had been replaced by a cold, hard calculation. The dream of becoming Mrs. Blackwood, the queen of New York real estate, had evaporated. All that was left was the reality of being tied to a man who was not just losing his fortune but was facing potential jail time. Her consulting firm made her a co-conspirator, a recipient of fraudulent funds. She was no longer an asset, she was a liability. Her eyes darted towards the exit. Her posture shifted. She was detaching herself from him, severing the cord in her mind. He wasn't her golden ticket anymore. He was a sinking ship. Judge Keller looked down from her bench, her face grim. She looked at Brantley not with anger but with a kind of weary disappointment, the look of a judge who had seen greed and hubris destroy countless lives before. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "given the evidence presented by Mr. Shaw, evidence of asset dissipation, potential conspiracy to defraud and blatant perjury before this court, I am signing an immediate temporary order." She began to speak, and each word was a nail in the coffin of Brantley's life as he knew it. "I am freezing all personal and corporate assets of both Brantley Blackwood and Blackwood Estates pending a full and immediate audit by a court-appointed receiver. I am ordering the immediate repatriation of all funds held in the entity known as Blackwood Holdings International. A full injunction is in place preventing you from selling, transferring, or borrowing against any known asset. Your business and personal credit cards are hereby suspended. We will reconvene in 48 hours to discuss the appointment of the receiver and to address the matter of your untruthfulness with this court." She banged her gavel. "This hearing is adjourned." The final percussive crack of Judge Keller's gavel did not so much end the proceedings as shatter the illusion of civility that had thinly veiled the courtroom. The sound echoed sharp and absolute, and in its wake, chaos bloomed. Gregory Adler, his face the color of old parchment, lunged toward Brantley, his voice a frantic, desperate whisper. "Brantley, don't say another word. Not a word to anyone. We need to retain criminal counsel immediately. Perjury, conspiracy to defraud. They can convene a grand jury." His words and those of the junior associates who swarmed the table like panicked ants were just noise. A distant buzzing static on the edge of Brantley's hearing. His world had shrunk to a pinpoint, a suffocating tunnel of vision focused on nothing at all. The judge's pronouncement replayed in his mind a torturous loop of incomprehensible phrases. Assets frozen. Court-appointed receiver. Repatriation of funds. Perjury. These were terms for other people, for criminals and failures he read about in the Wall Street Journal with detached pity. They were not words that could ever apply to him, Brantley Blackwood, the man who bent the city's skyline to his will. His body felt both immensely heavy and strangely disconnected, as if he were watching a movie of his own ruin. He needed an anchor, a familiar point in this swirling vortex of disaster. His eyes, wide with a dawning animal fear, darted to the gallery. He searched for the cascade of blonde hair, for the reassuring sight of the beautiful woman who was the symbol of his new life, the very reason for this entire ordeal. He scanned the front row, his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs with a new, more primal terror. The seat beside the aisle, the one Cassandra had occupied, was empty. She hadn't waited for the chaos to peak. The moment the gavel had fallen, a switch had flipped in her mind. It was a cold, clean, and utterly unsentimental calculation. The asset Brantley had become a liability. The future she had been meticulously curating, First Lady of Blackwood Estates, had been foreclosed. While all eyes were on the judge and the crumbling man at the plaintiff's table, Cassandra Reed had risen with the fluid grace of a cat. She hadn't run. She had simply walked her pace, measured her expression, a blank mask of neutrality down the aisle and out the heavy oak doors, before anyone even noticed she was gone. Her survival instinct, honed in the ruthless world of influencing and sugar daddy dating, was flawless. The show was over, and it was time to exit the stage before the set collapsed on top of her. Brantley didn't know this, of course. He only knew the crushing finality of that empty seat. He shoved himself to his feet, a strangled sound escaping his throat, pushing past Adler's restraining hand. "Cassandra?" He mumbled, his voice hoarse. He stumbled away from the table, away from the frantic legal advice and the pitying stares, and lurched into the marble corridor. The hallway was a cavern of echoes and whispers. He saw a clerk look away, a bailiff shake his head slowly. He was no longer a titan to be feared or respected. He was a spectacle, a man stripped bare in the public square. The corridor was empty. The Rolls-Royce and his loyal chauffeur would be waiting outside, a ghost of a life that was no longer his to command. But the woman he had brought to flaunt as his prize was gone. His hands shaking, he pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb fumbling to find her contact. He had to hear her voice, had to have her tell him this was all a nightmare. As the screen lit up, a notification banner appeared at the top. An Instagram update. Cassandra Reed just added to their story. With a trembling finger, he tapped it open. There was no picture of them, no defiant message of support. It was a simple black screen, the kind used for solemn announcements. In the center, in a delicate, serene font, were the words, "Sometimes you have to walk away to protect your own peace and integrity. Onwards and upwards." The platitude, so vapid and generic, was more brutal than any curse. It was a press release for her soul. She was already distancing herself, rebranding his collapse as a toxic environment she was bravely escaping. In the space of an afternoon, he had been demoted from a king to a footnote in her journey of self-discovery. A deep, guttural sound of pure agony tore from his throat. He leaned against the cold marble wall, the phone slipping from his grasp and clattering to the floor. At the far end of the same corridor, Galatia Blackwood emerged from the courtroom. She did not rush. She walked with a quiet, deliberate grace, as if measuring each step into her new reality. The perpetual tension that had lived in her shoulders for years, a constant, unwelcome companion, had finally dissolved. A profound, bone-deep weariness remained, but it was overlaid with the first stirrings of an unfamiliar lightness. Donovan Shaw was beside her, his worn leather briefcase held loosely in one hand. He had not gloated or offered a triumphant smile. He had simply packed his papers, a craftsman putting away his tools after a difficult job well done. He navigated her through the throng of reporters now gathered outside the doors, his presence a shield of quiet authority. "The court-appointed receiver will be fair but thorough," Shaw said, his voice a calm anchor in the turbulent aftermath. "They will unwind what he has done. It will take time, but the end result will be a just one. The initial injunction gives us all the leverage we need." Galatia nodded, looking not at the clamoring press, but through the grand courthouse windows at the sunlit expanse of Foley Square. "It was never just about the money, Donovan," she said, her voice steady. "You know that. It was about the truth. For 2 decades I poured myself into that life, that company. He tried to erase all of it. He tried to make me invisible, a ghost in my own history." "I do not think," Shaw replied, the corner of his mouth twitching in the barest hint of a smile, "that anyone in that courtroom today found you to be invisible, Mrs. Blackwood." For the first time that day, a genuine, unburdened smile touched Galatia's lips. It reached her eyes, which for months had been clouded with worry and betrayal. "Thank you," she said, the words carrying the weight of all her gratitude. "For everything." He gave a simple, respectful nod. It was all that was needed between them. His work would continue, but the battle, the one for her dignity, was over. Galatia walked out of the courthouse alone and stepped onto the top of the wide stone steps. For a moment she was blinded. The bright, unfiltered afternoon sun was a physical shock after the dim, wood-paneled solemnity of the court. She paused, lifting a hand to shield her eyes, and took a deep, clean breath. It was the first breath she'd taken in 18 months that didn't taste of anxiety. She had spent so long in the colossal shadow of Brantley's ego, learning to navigate the darkness of his moods and eventually his cruel betrayal. Now, standing on these steps, she felt the warmth on her face, heard the distant siren, the rumble of a subway beneath her feet, the cacophony of 1,000 lives intersecting in the city square. The world hadn't stopped for her drama. It had been waiting. She didn't look back at the grand building or the man whose life was imploding within its walls. There was no triumph in his ruin, only a deep, profound sorrow for the man he used to be and the marriage they had lost long before Cassandra ever appeared. Her victory wasn't over him. It was for herself. She looked forward down the steps at the endless river of New York City life flowing before her. She didn't know exactly what her future held, a smaller home perhaps, a return to the art world she'd left behind, a quiet life of her own making. The details were unwritten, but for the first time in a very long time she held the pen. The future was a blank page and it was hers. And it had just begun. In the end, Brantley Blackwood's empire wasn't brought down by a market crash or a rival developer, but by his own breathtaking arrogance and the quiet resolve of the woman he so carelessly underestimated. Galatia Blackwood didn't fight fire with fire. She fought it with cold, hard, undeniable fact, proving that the truth when wielded by a master is the most powerful weapon of all. This story is a powerful reminder that the loudest person in the room is not always the strongest, and that true strength doesn't need to announce its arrival, it proves itself in the final act. If you are captivated by Galatia's journey from betrayal to triumph, please show your support for stories like this. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see that justice can prevail, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more tales of shocking twists and ultimate vindication. What did you think of Cassandra's final move to abandon Brantley? Was it cold-blooded or simple survival? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one.
Pregnant wife begged Millionaire to believe her mistress faked a baby and took everything. A heart-wrenching betrayal, a desperate plea for trust, and a twisted scheme that defies belief. This is the story of how one woman's worst nightmare came true. In an opulent world of private jets and seaside mansions, love and deception run wild. A pregnant wife, clinging to hope in the face of unimaginable betrayal. A flamboyant millionaire torn between loyalty and seduction, and a cunning mistress with an audacious plan to fake a baby and seize everything. Brace yourselves for a real-life drama that will leave you breathless. Welcome to a tale of heartbreak and shocking twists, where the truth will only be revealed when it's almost too late. Anastasia Delgado wasn't born into wealth. She was a simple girl from a small town in Idaho, raised on family values of honesty, compassion, and diligence. Her father, Robert Delgado, worked long hours at the local lumber mill, while her mother, Linda Delgado, often juggled multiple part-time jobs just to keep food on the table. Growing up, Anastasia learned the importance of perseverance. She dreamed of a life that extended beyond the acres of farmland surrounding her. Her path crossed with William Will Harrington at a charity gala in Manhattan when she was 22. She had saved up for a bus ticket to New York, determined to chase her dream of becoming a fashion designer. Fate had other ideas for her that night. Dressed in a borrowed gown, hair pinned up in a simple chignon, Anastasia slipped unnoticed through the grand lobby of the Harrington Hotel, the flagship property owned by the illustrious Harrington family. The building was a testament to old money luxury, all marble floors and sparkling chandeliers. She felt out of place, just another face among the city's wealthiest socialites. Will Harrington spotted her from across the room, tall, with a slight stoop to his shoulders that only added to his quiet confidence. Will was something of an anomaly. He wasn't the brash, cigar-smoking playboy one might imagine of a millionaire heir. Instead, he was known for his philanthropic endeavors. At the age of 35, he managed the Harrington empire with the help of a talented board of executives. He specialized in high-end real estate, bridging heritage preservation with modern luxury developments across the country. When he saw Anastasia scanning the intricate murals on the walls, eyes shining with innocent wonder, he introduced himself. The two clicked almost instantly. Anastasia was impressed by Will's approachability. He made her feel at ease, even while wearing a perfectly tailored suit that screamed money. Over the next weeks, their relationship blossomed into a whirlwind romance. Will, mesmerized by Anastasia's authenticity, opened doors for her in the city's prestigious fashion circles. She visited runways, found internships, and started building a humble portfolio. While many around Will warned him about dating an outsider, he stood firm. Anastasia's humble background didn't matter to him. Her sincerity and gentle spirit were what he craved in a life partner. 6 months later, during a business trip in Florence, Italy, Will got down on one knee in front of the iconic Duomo. Despite the stares of tourists, he professed his love and asked Anastasia to be his wife. She said yes with tears in her eyes, feeling like a Cinderella in a story too good to be true. Their wedding was equally magical, a grand yet elegant ceremony at the Harrington estate in upstate New York. Nestled in lush gardens and overlooking a pristine lake, it was a sight that took everyone's breath away. Anastasia's family felt overwhelmed by the extravagance, but proud to see their daughter so loved. The society papers heralded the union as the marriage of the season. Rumors circulated about how the sweet, small-town girl had won the heart of one of America's wealthiest heirs. Behind the public facade, though, life wasn't as uncomplicated as it seemed. Will's extended family cast suspicious eyes on Anastasia. They worried she was a gold digger. Some labeled her an opportunist, someone who had strayed into the limelight on the coattails of a benevolent millionaire. These whispers would come to haunt Anastasia, casting dark shadows on her marriage. Yet, in the early days, their love story sparkled with genuine affection. They traveled the world together, from the beaches of Bali to the historic temples of Kyoto. Will took on fewer business trips, preferring to spend more time with his new wife. Anastasia discovered a niche in sustainable fashion. She slowly began to craft her own clothing line from organic fabrics, with Will proudly championing her designs at local showcases. Though they were seemingly perfect for each other, no marriage is immune to strain. Over time, Will's responsibilities grew, demanding his presence at every corner of his vast business empire. Meanwhile, Anastasia's creative pursuits intensified, with her brand gaining traction faster than she ever anticipated. Slowly but surely, cracks began to form in the foundation of their bliss. Neither anticipated that these cracks would be pried wide open by a cunning stranger, someone who had been watching the Harringtons from a distance, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Anastasia's first hint that her marriage was on shaky ground came during a Harrington board meeting. She wasn't typically involved in these gatherings, but Will invited her to sit in one afternoon, hoping to glean her fresh perspective on their philanthropic projects. The meeting took place in the intimidating Harrington Tower in Manhattan, a glass monument to the family's wealth, perched high above the city. As Anastasia arrived, an unsettling hush fell. The board members eyed her with thinly veiled skepticism. She noticed a tall, elegant woman among them, tapping her pen impatiently against a leather-bound folder. Her name was Charlotte Mansfield, a newly appointed communications director. With striking features and poised confidence, Charlotte was rumored to be the bright mind behind several successful marketing campaigns. Will sang her praises more than once, crediting her with reinvigorating the Harrington brand after a slump in public sentiment. Throughout the meeting, Charlotte's eyes drifted toward Anastasia. There was no warmth in her gaze, and Anastasia felt as though she were being sized up like a threat, or worse, an uninvited guest in her own husband's realm. Nonetheless, Anastasia tried to contribute. She spoke passionately about the philanthropic arm of Harrington Industries, encouraging the board to focus more on educational programs for underprivileged communities. She cited her own upbringing, referencing how scholarships had paved the way for countless individuals. Her suggestions were met with lukewarm approval, except from Charlotte, who clapped politely but offered a tight-lipped smile afterward. There was a subtle condescension in Charlotte's tone as she said, "That's certainly an interesting perspective, Mrs. Harrington. We'll take it under advisement." Will, eager to dispel any awkwardness, quickly echoed Anastasia's sentiments, praising her for her compassion. But the tension in the room was palpable. On the elevator ride down to the lobby, Anastasia felt uneasy. She questioned whether she truly belonged in Will's corporate universe. She couldn't shake off the image of Charlotte's piercing stare or the way the board members exchanged glances. That night, she confided in Will. He, predictably, assured her that she was overthinking things. They're just not used to having a fresh voice in the boardroom. "Don't take it personally," he said, pulling her close. "Besides, I love that you care enough to give your input. That's why I wanted you there." Anastasia's doubts lingered, yet she found solace in her husband's warm embrace. She remembered how Will had always been her biggest supporter. If his trust in her remained unshaken, she promised herself to trust him in return. But an undercurrent of unease had begun to take hold, one that only deepened as time went on. A few weeks after that board meeting, rumors reached Anastasia's ears about Will frequently working late nights with Charlotte. Although Will traveled for business often, the idea that he spent additional time with this elegant, suspicious woman made Anastasia restless. She tried to push the thoughts aside. Guilt gnawed at her for harboring any jealousy, especially considering Will had never given her a reason to distrust him. But her gut intuition told her something was amiss. One evening, after Will missed dinner for the third time that week, Anastasia decided to pay him a visit at his office. She walked into the top floor just after sunset. The reception area was empty. Dim lights illuminated the hallway. She could hear muffled voices from behind the thick boardroom door. Creeping closer, she recognized Will's voice and Charlotte's, pitched low. She knocked gently and entered. Will looked tired, leaning over a stack of documents. Charlotte was poised at the far end of the table, posture straight, wearing a fitted suit that accentuated her figure. She gave Anastasia an almost triumphant smile. "Darling," Will said, sounding both pleased and surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I thought I'd bring you dinner," Anastasia replied, forcing a smile. She tried to read Will's expression, searching for signs of guilt or discomfort, but he simply appeared overworked. "Oh, that's lovely," Charlotte interjected, stepping closer with a polite nod at the takeout bag in Anastasia's hand. "Mr. Harrington has been going through these documents all day." Anastasia felt the strain in the air. She sensed she'd walked in on something, maybe not a scandalous moment, but a conversation loaded with subtext. Restraining her nerves, she handed Will the food and left after a brief, awkward chat. That night, Will came home late, explaining Charlotte had last-minute marketing strategies to finalize. He apologized for missing dinner, and Anastasia let it slide. But in the privacy of her thoughts, a small voice warned her that a storm was brewing, whispering that her fairy tale marriage might be unraveling at the seams. It was about 2 months later that the name Carmen Sinclair first crossed Anastasia's radar. Carmen was a striking woman in her late 20s with dark, flowing hair and magnetic hazel eyes. She was Charlotte Mansfield's friend from their college years at least. That was the story circulating around the Harrington offices. Carmen showed up one afternoon at a lavish fundraiser event for the Harrington Foundation, the philanthropic wing of the corporation. Anastasia noticed her immediately. The event was bustling with guests, but Carmen's presence stood out like a bright flame. She worked the room gracefully, introducing herself to various attendees with a confident handshake and an even more confident smile. At first glance, she appeared to be a polished socialite, someone with the kind of class and affluence that allowed her to fit in seamlessly among the wealthy. Yet, there was something about Carmen's aura that put Anastasia on edge. She couldn't place it exactly. Perhaps it was the way Carmen's eyes flicked calculatingly across the ballroom, as if searching for someone or something specific. or the hushed conversation Carmen shared with Charlotte near the champagne table, after which both women parted ways wearing cryptic smiles. Midway through the evening, Carmen found her way to Will. Anastasia watched from a distance as Carmen engaged him in an animated discussion. Will looked polite but not particularly friendly, at least, not at first. Then Carmen leaned closer, presumably to share some secret or detail only they could hear. Will's expression shifted, eyebrows raising in mild surprise, followed by a nod. Anastasia felt the knot of insecurity tighten in her stomach. She debated whether to walk over and join them, but was intercepted by a group of donors wanting to discuss her upcoming sustainable fashion show. By the time she broke free, Carmen had drifted away, blending effortlessly back into the crowd. "Who was that woman you were talking to earlier?" Anastasia asked Will on the drive home. They rode in a sleek black limousine, courtesy of Harrington Industries. "Carmen Sinclair," Will replied. "She's looking to expand some philanthropic endeavors in Latin America, similar to our scholarship program in Brazil. Charlotte introduced us. I told her we'd be open to collaborating." He shrugged, checking messages on his phone. Anastasia nodded, not wanting to appear suspicious. "She seems very outgoing," she observed carefully. Will laughed. "That's one way to put it. She's extremely ambitious, wants to partner with as many corporations as possible. Charlotte insists Carmen is a powerhouse at negotiations." The conversation ended there, but the memory of Carmen's penetrating hazel eyes lingered. Over the next few weeks, Carmen's name surfaced repeatedly. She attended corporate events, charity meetings, and even showed up at an intimate dinner Will hosted for potential investors. Each time, she managed to corner Will for private chats about big ideas and impact-driven projects. Anastasia found her unstoppable, a social bulldozer forging alliances and forging them quickly. And then, quite suddenly, Carmen's presence skyrocketed. She earned a consulting contract with Harrington Industries through Charlotte's recommendation. Officially, Carmen's role was to facilitate philanthropic partnerships in South America. Unofficially, gossip suggested she was more of a roving ambassador for Harrington's brand, capitalizing on her mesmerizing charm. Anastasia's concerns heightened when Will mentioned Carmen's repeated requests for him to travel alongside her. "It'll help seal deals," Carmen insisted, referencing her deep connections in Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. Anastasia, recalling Will's busy schedule, tried to dissuade him, but business demanded results. With Charlotte backing Carmen, the board saw it as an opportunity to enhance Harrington's global reputation. Before long, Will was jetting off to meetings in Rio de Janeiro and Buenos Aires. He updated Anastasia via hurried phone calls, telling her how Carmen had orchestrated fruitful negotiations or introduced them to influential figures. Yet, behind Will's enthusiasm, Anastasia detected an undercurrent of stress in his voice, frustration that he had to rely on so many new people, that the corporate environment was no longer solely his territory to manage. One evening, after Will had been gone for nearly a week, Anastasia received an email from an anonymous account. The subject line read, "Your husband is having too much fun on his business trip." She hesitated before opening it, heart pounding. Inside was a photo, grainy, possibly taken with a phone from a distance. But it was clear enough. Will seated at a beachside restaurant, Carmen by his side, leaning into him. He appeared to be laughing, a hand lightly touching Carmen's wrist. Anastasia's blood ran cold. It might have been an innocent moment, but the caption attached read, "This is just the beginning." A wave of nausea rolled through her, mingled with anger. She tried calling Will. It went straight to voicemail. She left a tense message, her voice shaking. In the hours that followed, she paced the penthouse, waiting for a call back. Sleep was impossible. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and with each tick of the clock, They took firmer root in her mind, yet she couldn't leap to conclusions, not without tangible proof. At 3 a.m., her phone buzzed. A text from Will read, "In a meeting, everything okay?" She didn't know how to respond. Instead of replying, she tossed and turned until dawn, replaying the photo in her mind. She told herself there might be a rational explanation, but the illusions of a perfect marriage were being eroded by the relentless tide of suspicion, and Carmen Sinclair seemed determined to be at the center of it all. Will returned from his trip 2 days later, surprising Anastasia early in the morning. She had just finished her yoga routine on their penthouse balcony when he walked in, suitcases in hand. He looked exhausted, eyes ringed with fatigue. "Hey," he greeted, setting down his luggage before embracing her. "I've missed you." Anastasia tried to gauge his sincerity. His hug felt warm, and for a moment she allowed herself to relax into his arms. Yet the memory of that incriminating photo lurked. They sat down to a late breakfast. Over coffee, she finally confronted him. "I got an email with a picture of you and Carmen at a beachside restaurant. You were close. It felt odd. Is there anything you want to tell me?" Will exhaled sharply, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Carmen and I had lunch with a local investor on the beach. Maybe the angle of the photo made it look more intimate than it was. I promise nothing untoward happened." Anastasia studied him. His explanation sounded plausible, but she wasn't entirely convinced. "Will," she began softly, "I need to know if there's anything going on. If you're under pressure, or if there's something you can't share with me, just say it. Don't let me find out from someone else." He reached across the table to hold her hands, his gaze steady. "I swear, there's nothing else." "Carmen's pushy, that's true, but it's all about business. I'm sorry you got that photo in such a malicious way. It's clearly someone trying to stir trouble." Anastasia wanted so desperately to believe him. She nodded, letting the matter rest for the moment. Over the next few weeks, life moved in a strange pattern. Will continued his travels, though he tried to reassure Anastasia with frequent calls and updates. Carmen's name was no longer a daily feature of their conversations. Perhaps Will sensed her discomfort and pulled back from mentioning his collaborator too often. Anastasia focused on her growing fashion line. She threw herself into sketches, sample fittings, and marketing campaigns, determined to achieve a breakthrough. She managed a successful show in downtown Manhattan, receiving positive reviews. On the surface, things appeared to be stabilizing. Yet, as if guided by fate, a new blow soon shattered that sense of calm. It happened one chilly morning when Anastasia, feeling unusually lethargic, decided to take a home pregnancy test. She'd been tracking her cycle meticulously, and it was days late. With her heart pounding in both excitement and fear, she stared at the little indicator, breath catching when the pink lines emerged. Positive. She was pregnant. A whirlwind of emotions swept over her, wonder, love, and a rush of anxiety. Would Will be thrilled? Was this the right time to bring a baby into a marriage that was under strain? She decided not to overthink it. Instead, she planned a special dinner, wanting to break the news in a memorable way. That evening, she prepared Will's favorite dishes, roasted lamb with rosemary and garlic mashed potatoes. She lit candles and set the table. Will arrived home looking drained from another day of endless meetings, but a small smile tugged at his lips when he saw the effort Anastasia had put into the meal. As they sat down to eat, she couldn't contain her excitement. She held his hand and said, "Will, I have something to tell you, something life-changing." She then announced her pregnancy. For a moment, Will's face lit up with genuine joy. His grin stretched wide, and he jumped up to hug her, exclaiming, "I can't believe it! We're going to have a baby." He kissed her temple softly, tears of happiness in his eyes. In that instant, Anastasia felt all her anxieties melt away. Whatever had happened with Carmen or Charlotte, or the nosy board members. It seemed inconsequential. She and Will were going to start a family. They had a future to look forward to. But the euphoria proved short-lived. A week later, Will received an anonymous package delivered to his office. It contained printed photos, hundreds of them showing him and Carmen in various settings: a hotel lobby, a business lounge, an upscale restaurant, even walking along a scenic coastal path. Some pictures were taken from angles that made the pair look suspiciously close. Many had timestamps coinciding with his business trips. The enclosed note read, "There's more to come if you don't pay up." It was blackmail. Will rushed home, pale and shaking, the package in hand. Anastasia listened in horror as he explained. She picked through the photos, stomach churning. Some were manipulated, clearly taken out of context. Others, however, showed an undeniable camaraderie. Will, with his arm around Carmen's shoulder, laughing as if they were sharing private jokes. He insisted it was nothing romantic, just casual moments of friendship during tense negotiations. But the blackmailer's intention was clear. They wanted to paint Will as an adulterer, threatening to release the images to the press if he didn't meet their demands. For the first time, Anastasia saw Will break. He sank onto the couch, head in his hands. "This could destroy everything I've built. Investors will flee. My family's reputation will be ruined. And you'll think I cheated on you." Anastasia sat beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. Despite her growing insecurity, she knew this blackmail scheme was malicious. "We'll figure this out," she whispered. "We'll fight it." Tears brimmed in her eyes as she thought of their unborn child, now bound up in a firestorm of lies and deceit. If only she knew that the worst was yet to come, that Carmen wasn't just a passive bystander in these photos, but an active orchestrator who had woven a carefully designed trap. In the ensuing chaos, Charlotte Mansfield played a peculiar role. She reassured Will that she would investigate who might be behind the blackmail and handle any potential leaks to the media. She offered to coordinate with a private investigator on Will's behalf. Her efficiency and calm demeanor came across as professional, and yet something about her intense interest in controlling the narrative made Anastasia wary. Meanwhile, Carmen seemed to vanish from public engagements. No one saw her at Harrington events. She stopped showing up for philanthropic meetings. Even her social media, which had been filled with glamorous updates, went silent. Will, though relieved by her disappearance, was still plagued by worry. Either she's gone underground, or she's planning something bigger, he mused one evening, pacing their living room floor. Anastasia, her pregnancy well into its second month, felt exhausted, but she tried to stay supportive. She rubbed her belly absent-mindedly, wondering if stress would harm her child. They soon found out what Carmen's next move was. Anastasia was at her obstetrician's office for a routine checkup when her phone erupted with messages. She glanced at the screen to find a dozen news alerts. Her heart hammered as she tapped one headline: "Millionaire Will Harrington's secret mistress claims she's pregnant." Her vision blurred. She scrolled through the article. It claimed that Carmen Sinclair had come forward alleging she was carrying Will Harrington's child. Anonymous sources confirmed that she was already 2 months along. The article painted Carmen as a victim, someone who had tried to extricate herself from a fling when she realized he was a married man, but who now faced a pregnancy she hadn't planned. The piece dripped with sensationalism, describing a sob story about Carmen being abandoned and left to fend for herself. Anastasia's chest tightened. She reread the lines, hoping it was some grotesque hoax, but the media outlets were running with it, fueled by the blackmail photos that suggested an affair. She nearly dropped her phone as the nurse called her name. Somehow, she made it through the appointment, tears burning behind her eyelids. Afterward, she rushed home to find Will already surrounded by frantic calls from advisors, PR teams, and board members demanding answers. The Harrington brand was on the brink of scandal, and the stock market was reacting. "What is this?" Anastasia asked, voice trembling. Will wore the expression of a man cornered by the world. "I don't know," he said, raking a hand through his hair. "Carmen is lying. I never slept with her. I swear it. But she has the photos, and the press is eating it up." Anastasia sank onto the couch, mind racing. She claims she's pregnant. What is she hoping to gain? Will shook his head, bitterness twisting his features. Money, revenge, power, maybe all of the above. In the days that followed, the Harrington estate was bombarded with reporters. A few brazen paparazzi even tried to breach the gates. Headlines screamed from every tabloid: "Pregnant mistress of a millionaire, Harrington's double life, scandal in the upper echelons." Anastasia couldn't even leave the house without being harassed by photographers hurling questions like arrows. By the time Carmen staged her own press conference in a swanky Manhattan hotel, the scandal was at its peak. Wearing a modest, flowing dress and cradling a slightly rounded belly, she tearfully insisted that she never wanted to destroy the Harrington marriage. Yet she had to speak her truth. She claimed to be 4 months pregnant, conveniently adjusting her timeline to match her narrative, and brandished alleged text messages from Will messages that painted him as desperate and lovesick. Anastasia and Will watched the broadcast in their living room, their lawyer present. The texts Carmen displayed were doctored some pieces of genuine conversation about business expansions, spliced with flirty lines that neither recognized, but proving that in the court of public opinion would be an uphill battle. When the reporters asked for evidence, Carmen theatrically dabbed at her tears and handed out copies of a supposed paternity test. It was typed up on letterhead from a local clinic, showing a 99.9% match between Will Harrington and baby Sinclair. Anastasia nearly retched in horror. It looked so official, yet in her heart she believed Will was innocent. "I'm not sure how she forged it," their lawyer muttered, scanning the document, "but these can be faked if someone has the right connections. We need to take immediate legal action to disprove her claims." Will's hand clenched into a fist as he spoke to the lawyer. "Let's do whatever it takes to show she's lying. We'll get our own test. We'll bring forth every shred of evidence to clear my name." But Carmen had orchestrated the perfect storm: the blackmail photos, the alleged text messages, and now the pregnancy claim. Anastasia's mind reeled, thinking of the baby in her own womb. She was the real pregnant wife, yet here was a conniving woman twisting the story for public sympathy. Worst of all, the Harrington board was losing its composure. Some members demanded Will step down as CEO until the scandal passed. Others suggested an out-of-court settlement to make the story go away. Tensions rose, alliances frayed. Anastasia became a target for tabloids, painted as either a clueless victim or a complicit gold digger. Through it all, Charlotte Mansfield remained curiously neutral. She offered no condemnation of Carmen, instead emphasizing the need for crisis management. Anastasia tried to corner Charlotte one day, pressing her about Carmen's authenticity and how well she really knew her. Charlotte deflected, claiming she had no idea Carmen would resort to this. Anastasia walked away from that conversation with a gnawing feeling that Charlotte knew more than she let on. But there were bigger battles to fight. She had to protect her unborn child, her marriage, and her own sanity. Carmen had set the stage, playing the role of an abandoned mistress with a cunning that left the Harringtons on the defensive. And just when Anastasia thought it couldn't get worse, Carmen delivered another blow, one that threatened to destroy them all. As the scandal raged, Anastasia's health suffered. Stress and heartbreak took their toll. She battled morning sickness, but the emotional strain overshadowed every physical discomfort. She couldn't open a magazine or scroll online without seeing headlines about Will's alleged betrayal and Carmen's painful ordeal. Friends called less often, unsure what to say. Even some of Anastasia's business associates hesitated to collaborate, fearing negative publicity. Will, for his part, was in a constant state of damage control, meeting with lawyers, PR experts, and senior board members. A hush of unease fell over their once loving home. Conversations grew short, tempers frayed. They tried, however, to remain a united front. Anastasia believed in his innocence, but the relentless public scrutiny began gnawing at her faith. One afternoon, a breakthrough came in the form of an email. It was from a private investigator named Mark Faulkner, who had been discreetly hired by Will to trace the source of the blackmail. In it, Mark mentioned a digital trail linking the anonymous demands to a certain IP address. That address belonged to none other than Charlotte Mansfield. Anastasia was in the living room when Will blurted the news, face taut with disbelief. "Charlotte has been behind the blackmail all along," he said, reading from his phone. "Or at least her computer was used to send the emails and messages. She's also made several suspicious financial transactions correlating with Carmen's appearances in the company." Anastasia stared at him, her mind reeling. The woman who had seamlessly integrated herself into Harrington Industries, who had championed Carmen as a consultant, was the very person orchestrating the sabotage. A swirl of anger, betrayal, and fierce resolve filled Anastasia. They summoned Charlotte to a private meeting at the Harrington Tower, choosing a small conference room away from prying eyes. She arrived looking composed, though a flicker of worry crossed her features when she saw Will and Anastasia waiting with the investigator. "Charlotte," Will began, voice quivering with rage he barely contained, "we have evidence tying you to the blackmail attempts and the forged documents Carmen used." Charlotte's face paled momentarily, but she quickly regained her composure. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, glancing at the investigator. Mark Faulkner slid printed copies of financial statements and IP logs across the table. "These transactions, these server traces, lead back to your corporate account and devices. There's also a large sum transferred from your bank to an offshore account belonging to Carmen Sinclair." Charlotte's eyes darted to the papers. She pressed her lips together. For a moment, Anastasia saw a flicker of desperation in her eyes. Then Charlotte sighed, shoulders sagging. "Fine," she said quietly. "Yes, I helped Carmen, but you have no idea why." Anastasia folded her arms. "Then enlighten us," she said icily. Charlotte spoke in a near monotone. She claimed she had known Carmen since college, though they hadn't been close then. But Carmen reached out months ago, spinning a tale of heartbreak. Carmen said she was in love with Will and that he had led her on. Furious at the alleged injustice, Charlotte felt compelled to teach Will a lesson. She was also resentful of how quickly Will had risen to become CEO while she remained in a secondary role. Carmen promised Charlotte a substantial share of the payout once Will forked over hush money. "You were going to destroy our entire family," Anastasia said, voice trembling. Charlotte's composure cracked. "You don't understand. I spent years working tirelessly in this company, only to watch you walk in with your wide eyes and innocent smile, capturing Will's attention. And Carmen, well, she had her own vengeance to exact. We joined forces. Yes, I planted the seeds with the board, fueled rumors, and orchestrated Carmen's consultant role to ensure she and Will spent time together. Then we manipulated the photos, faked the pregnancy test. It was perfect until the blackmail demands escalated. Carmen wanted more than I was prepared to give." Will stared at her in disbelief. "You're insane. You had everything, a top executive position, a bright future here. Why do this?" Charlotte glared, tears forming in her eyes. "Because I've been invisible my entire life, overshadowed by people like you. I wanted to be recognized, to have power. Carmen convinced me we could both benefit. Honestly, I never thought it would go this far. The confession left a bitter taste in the air. Will demanded that Charlotte resign immediately, threatening legal action. She agreed, expression hollow. "I know I'm finished here," she muttered before walking out, her heels echoing down the corridor. Anastasia collapsed into a chair, trying to process everything. "So Carmen's pregnancy is a complete fabrication?" she asked Mark Faulkner. He nodded grimly. "So far, we found no records of legitimate tests. The documents she presented are all forged, but she's likely to keep playing this card until forced to stop." Will placed a hand on Anastasia's shoulder. He was visibly shaken. "We have to prove her lies. We have to end this once and for all." Yet, even with Charlotte unmasked, Carmen still held the public sympathy, and the scandal continued to swirl like a tornado, leaving the Harringtons struggling to salvage their reputation. That night, Will and Anastasia lay in bed, neither able to sleep. Anastasia's mind kept drifting to their unborn baby. How was she going to shield their child from this storm? She laced her fingers through Will's, searching for reassurance. He squeezed back, eyes full of guilt and love. Together, they silently vowed to stand firm against Carmen's final onslaught. With Charlotte's treachery exposed, Will's immediate concern was blocking Carmen's next moves. Their legal team filed a defamation lawsuit, demanding Carmen produce medical proof of her alleged pregnancy. Meanwhile, stockholders clamored for reassurance, urging Will to either settle or find a swift way to cut off the negative press. Despite the crisis, Anastasia soldiered on with her pregnancy. She established a rigorous self-care routine and tried her best to focus on healthy foods, mindfulness practices, and staying connected to supportive friends. Yet, every time she turned on the TV, her heart sank. News anchors speculated about Will's innocence. Talk show hosts debated the validity of Carmen's claims. Internet forums buzzed with theories ranging from Will's definitely cheating to Carmen's a gold digger. The worst blow came one morning when an interviewer cornered Anastasia outside a grocery store. Clutching her cart, she tried to shield her face, but the camera was relentless. "Miss S. Harrington, is it true you're expecting a child as well? How do you feel knowing another woman is pregnant with your husband's baby?" Anastasia froze, pain twisting her stomach. She had to fight the urge to scream. Summoning her dignity, she murmured, "My husband and I stand by each other." No further comment. Her composure crumbled the moment she got into her car, tears streaming down her cheeks. All she wanted was a normal pregnancy, free from the tabloids and vicious rumors. Later that evening, after a heated conversation with the Harrington board, Will came home looking like a man on the verge of collapse. He slumped against the living room wall, his phone clutched in his hand. Anastasia hurried over, alarmed. "What happened?" she asked, voice trembling. He took a shaky breath. "They're telling me to pay Carmen off. They say it's better to settle privately and make this go away instead of going through a messy legal battle. Some have threatened to call a vote on my leadership if I refuse." Anastasia's jaw tightened. "They want you to bribe her. They're cowards." Will exhaled, a tremor in his voice. "I don't want to give in, but the board is spooked. And Carmen, she's scheduled an ultrasound reveal with some tabloid channel. She's going to fake a sonogram to prove she's pregnant. This circus is never ending." Anastasia set her shoulders, tears threatening to fall. "I'll beg if I have to," she said, eyes shining with determination. "I'll go on camera. I'll do anything to expose her. But I won't let you pay hush money to that woman, not after what she's done." Will pulled her into a fierce hug, burying his face in her hair. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I don't want to lose everything I've worked for. But I don't want to lose you either. And all this stress. It can't be good for our baby." His words struck a chord. Through all the heartbreak, Anastasia had to stay strong for their child. She felt a surge of protectiveness, not just for her unborn baby, but for Will as well. She couldn't let Carmen's twisted plot win. That night, she made a decision. She would speak out publicly, not as a victim, but as a wife who believed in her husband's innocence. She reached out to a reputable network, one known for fair reporting, and arranged a live interview. Her PR advisors balked at the idea, warning it might invite more scrutiny. Will was torn, worried it could backfire, but Anastasia refused to remain silent any longer. On the day of the interview, she arrived at the studio early. The producer greeted her with a respectful nod. Anastasia wore a simple yet elegant dress that hinted at her pregnancy without flaunting it. Her hands trembled in her lap, but she steadied herself by remembering why she was doing this, to restore truth and shield her family. The host, Mary Collins, was a seasoned journalist known for her calm demeanor. Once the cameras rolled, Mary introduced Anastasia, summarizing the swirling rumors. Then she asked the burning question, "Miss S. Harrington, do you believe Carmen Sinclair's claims that she's pregnant with your husband's child?" Anastasia took a breath. "No, I do not," she said firmly. Her gaze was level, her voice clear. "I have every reason to believe Carmen Sinclair is lying, and we have evidence that her so-called pregnancy tests are forgeries." She went on to describe the blackmail attempts, the manipulations, and how Charlotte Mansfield had confessed to conspiring with Carmen. She spoke passionately about the toll the lies took on her marriage and her unborn baby. At times, her voice trembled, but she pressed on, finishing with a direct address to Carmen. "If you are truly pregnant, you have nothing to fear from taking a legitimate paternity test under supervised conditions. Until you do that, I won't believe a word you say." When the segment ended, the studio was silent. Mary Collins looked moved by Anastasia's sincerity. On social media, clips from the interview began trending, with many viewers expressing sympathy for the visibly emotional pregnant wife defending her husband. Though some trolls accused her of denial or being complicit in a cover-up, the tide of public opinion started to shift. Anastasia left the studio feeling both drained and oddly emboldened. She'd pleaded her case before the world, begging for them to see the truth, whether it would be enough to topple. Carmen's fabricated story remained to be seen, but she had taken a stand, and she vowed that, until her last breath, she would fight for her family. In the days that followed Anastasia's interview, the internet buzzed with heated debates. Some sympathized with Carmen, insisting she must be pregnant if she was willing to appear at a scheduled ultrasound reveal. Others rallied behind Anastasia, praising her courage in defending her marriage amid relentless public scrutiny. Eventually, Carmen announced her big broadcast. She invited a sensationalist gossip channel, Starshine Network, to film her ultrasound appointment. To lend it credibility, she had an alleged doctor later exposed as someone whose medical license was under review, ready to confirm her pregnancy. She teased the event on social media, promising to reveal whether it was a boy or a girl. Harrington's legal team filed an injunction, demanding an impartial medical professional be allowed to oversee any paternity or ultrasound test. The court date was set within a week, but Carmen's show loomed closer. With little time to maneuver, Will and Anastasia braced for the worst. On the day of Carmen's televised stunt, the Harringtons received an unexpected message, a man named Julio Ferreira, claiming to be Carmen's ex-boyfriend. He wrote that he had proof Carmen was lying about the pregnancy, that she was, in fact, physically incapable of carrying a child due to a medical condition. Julio said he had documents and was willing to testify. With hope rising, Anastasia's lawyer quickly arranged for Julio to meet them at a secure location, away from the media. In a small conference room at the law firm, Julio showed up with a folder of medical records, translations, and personal correspondence. Speaking in a softly accented voice, he recounted how Carmen had once manipulated him in a similar manner, pretending to be pregnant to extort money. "She tried it with me," Julio explained, pushing a stack of papers across the table. "But I discovered she can't conceive. She underwent surgery in her 20s and her fertility was compromised. I was furious, but she threatened me with legal repercussions if I exposed her. I fled back to Argentina and she chased me off with her powerful lawyer contacts." Anastasia felt an exhilarated rush, tempered by caution. "These documents, are they legitimate?" Julio nodded. "I got them from a clinic in Buenos Aires where Carmen had procedures done. I have the original scans. Doctors confirmed her fertility issues." Will's lawyer examined the paperwork, eyes brightening. This could finally discredit her. "If these are authentic, we can stop her from going on air with this ridiculous charade." But time was short. Carmen's ultrasound reveal was happening that same evening. The question was whether they could gather enough legal muscle to stop the broadcast in time. In a flurry of activity, the Harrington legal team rushed to a judge with Julio's evidence, hoping for an emergency order. Hours ticked by as anxious phone calls flew back and forth. Meanwhile, Starshine Network promoted Carmen's special, boasting exclusive footage of the alleged mother-to-be. When the broadcast began at 8 p.m., Will and Anastasia sat in their living room, glued to the TV. The judge's ruling hadn't come through yet. The show opened with dramatic music, panning to a glowing Carmen in a maternity dress, greeting the camera with a staged smile. A shady doctor stood by her side, nodding in rehearsed agreement. "We are moments away," the host gushed, "from seeing the first ultrasound images of Will Harrington's love child." Anastasia's heart pounded. She squeezed Will's hand, watching as Carmen settled onto an exam table. The so-called doctor applied gel to her abdomen and moved a portable ultrasound wand back and forth. On the screen was a generic ultrasound loop, one that any obstetrician would know wasn't in real time. But most viewers at home wouldn't catch the discrepancy. "That's it," the host breathed, pointing to a flicker on the screen, the baby's heartbeat. Suddenly, a commotion erupted from off-camera. The feed scrambled as security guards rushed in. The host sputtered, "What's happening?" The audio became jumbled, but viewers could see men in suits confronting the fake doctor, brandishing documents. Will and Anastasia's phones started blowing up with texts from their lawyers. The emergency order had come through. Law enforcement arrived at the filming location with Julio's evidence, demanding the broadcast stop or face immediate legal consequences for fraud. The next several minutes were chaotic. The network cut to commercial, then attempted to resume, only to have Carmen appear visibly distraught. She insisted she was a victim of intimidation. At one point, she tried to show a lab report proving her pregnancy, but a representative from the medical board slapped a cease and desist order into her hands on live television, citing the questionable credentials of her doctor. It was a dramatic meltdown. Carmen, cornered and flustered, stammered that she had miscarried earlier and that she was only using an ultrasound from a previous checkup as proof. But her story fell apart under the spotlight. The show ended abruptly, leaving millions of viewers baffled by the contradictory claims. When the dust settled, Anastasia and Will sat in stunned silence. Their phones continued to ring. Friends, family, business colleagues, everyone was calling or texting to say that Carmen had just been exposed on live TV. The forged ultrasound, the shady doctor, the newly surfaced medical documents, it was undeniable. Carmen Sinclair's pregnancy was a hoax. Anastasia let out a long, trembling breath. Tears slid down her cheeks, a mix of relief, anger, and exhaustion. Will leaned against the couch, jaw slack in astonishment. "It's over," he whispered, pulling her into his arms. "Finally, it's over." Yet, Even as they embraced, a gnawing uncertainty lingered in the back of Anastasia's mind. They had won a major battle, but what about Carmen's next move? A woman capable of orchestrating such an elaborate sham might not vanish quietly. For the moment, though, victory felt sweet, and she allowed herself the fragile hope that this nightmare was coming to an end. The days following Carmen's catastrophic televised collapse were a whirlwind of statements, apologies, and legal repercussions. Starshine Network scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal, issuing a formal apology to the Harrington family for broadcasting fraudulent claims. Public sympathy for Carmen quickly evaporated, replaced by widespread condemnation. The lawsuit filed by Will's team gained momentum. Carmen went into hiding, seldom seen by paparazzi. Rumors circulated that she was negotiating a plea bargain involving potential extortion charges. Meanwhile, Charlotte Mansfield faced her own legal troubles for her part in the blackmail scheme. Harrington Industries board finally rallied behind Will, relieved that the scandal was exposed as a hoax. Their stock prices began to recover. Throughout this upheaval, Anastasia's pregnancy marched on. She felt each milestone a growing belly, the first flutter of kicks, the excitement of planning a nursery. Bit by bit, she and Will found their way back to the loving bond they once shared. They had weathered the biggest test of their marriage and emerged stronger, though not unscathed. One cool autumn afternoon, Anastasia was in her studio, reviewing fabric swatches for her fashion line, when her phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. She paused, heart thudding, as she opened it. "Meet me at the Belmont Cafe if you want final closure. C.S.C.S.C.A.R.M.E.N. Sinclair." A chill ran through Anastasia. Why on earth would Carmen want a meeting? She debated, ignoring it. The woman was a proven liar, a dangerous manipulator, yet something inside her stirred. A desire to face Carmen one last time, to understand what fueled such malevolence, and to ensure she couldn't harm them anymore. Against her better judgment, Anastasia told Will about the text. He was furious, urging her to let the lawyers handle it, but Anastasia insisted on going, with security measures in place. She needed to see Carmen for herself, to end this on her own terms. Later that day, she arrived at the Belmont Cafe, a modest place near the outskirts of Manhattan. It was nearly empty in the late afternoon. Anastasia spotted Carmen seated at a corner table, wearing large sunglasses and a scarf. She looked haggard, as if the events had aged her 10 years. Anastasia approached, her posture tense. Their exchange was curt at first, both women guarded. Carmen removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes that seemed devoid of their old sparkle. She confessed she had lost everything, her reputation, her finances, and even the friends who once supported her. Lawyers were circling, preparing for trial. "What do you want?" Anastasia asked quietly, trying to suppress the anger that simmered beneath her calm exterior. Carmen sighed, staring into her untouched coffee. "To apologize, I suppose, and to tell you why." The apology sounded forced, but Carmen did delve into her motivations. She admitted to harboring resentment toward wealthy families who seemed to glide through life without hardship. Meeting Charlotte at a charity event reinvigorated her old schemes, and together they hatched a plan. But Carmen never expected Anastasia's unwavering faith in Will to triumph so publicly. "You were supposed to crumble," Carmen said, bitterness tinging her voice. "I thought if I brought enough pressure, you'd divorce him, he'd settle with me quietly, and I'd walk away rich." She shook her head. "But you never broke, even when the tabloids were vicious. You're stronger than I realized." Anastasia felt an odd swell of pity, overshadowed by rage. "You ruined my peace," she said, voice shaking with emotion. "You put me and my unborn child through hell. And for what? Money?" Carmen's gaze dropped. "I'm sorry," she said at last. though Anastasia doubted the sincerity. "I won't fight the lawsuit. I just wanted you to know that. It's over." Anastasia rose to leave, her body trembling. She could hardly stand to look at this woman who had so callously shattered her world. Yet part of her recognized that Carmen was broken, consumed by envy and greed. Outside, Will was waiting in a car with a driver. Anastasia slid into the seat, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. As they drove away, she allowed herself a final glance back at the cafe. Carmen remained seated, lost in her own turmoil. In the weeks and months that followed, the lawsuit concluded with Carmen forced to pay damages for defamation and extortion attempts. Charlotte struck a plea deal, agreeing to cooperate and testify against Carmen in exchange for a reduced sentence. Harrington Industries regained its footing, and the public eventually found other scandals to obsess over. By the time Anastasia gave birth to a baby boy named Robert William Harrington, the family's nightmare had largely faded. They welcomed their new child into a world where love trumped lies, where perseverance overcame treachery. Though scars remained, the Harringtons had survived, and in surviving, they discovered a depth of loyalty and resilience that no amount of wealth could ever buy. Thank you for joining us on this tumultuous journey of heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimate redemption. Anastasia Delgado Harrington stood her ground against cunning foes, fighting for her marriage, her unborn child, and her reputation, proof that sometimes love and determination can conquer even the most vicious deceptions. Though the road was fraught with scandalous twists and devastating turns, truth prevailed in the end. Carmen Sinclair's lies unraveled beneath the harsh light of public scrutiny, and the Harrington family reclaimed their peace. If this real-life drama stirred your emotions, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you'll never miss out on more riveting stories that remind us of life's greatest lessons about trust, resilience, and the power of unbreakable bonds. Your support keeps these tales alive, and we can't wait to share the next saga with you.